What's up, Tailgaters? My name is Tailgate Nate. Welcome to my channel. Earlier today, I put out my updated college football playoff and New Year's Six bowl game predictions. Well, let's now start talking about what could happen with the college football playoff this year, right? This year seems a lot easier than some other years past, right? This year seems pretty clear cut and dry on who the top four could be. In my opinion, we got 5 teams vying for a playoff spot, and those are the 5 teams that you see down below. But some teams are going to need a little bit more help than others. Some of them may even be playoff locks. We're going to dive into all that right now. As you see, the teams on screen are 1 through 5 in the College Football Playoff Committee's poll. Today, I have 4 scenarios for you guys that are fairly realistic that can happen, and I'll kind of talk about what would happen if those scenarios were to play out. And then I'll be going through one chaos scenario as well. If you guys have more scenarios, more thoughts, please leave it in the comment section down below. I'd be really curious to hear what you have. Otherwise, like, comment, subscribe, anything you can to help support the channel. It does mean a lot to me. So without further ado, let's dive on in to some college football playoff scenarios. First up, though, I do want to talk about our playoff contenders, the 5 teams that you see right below me. Starting off with the updated playoff field, right? This is what the committee's top 4 is looking like right now, with Ohio State and Alabama sitting just on the outside at number 5 and number 6. And again, these are the projected bowl games I would have each playoff semifinal being played at. And this is just what the committee has right now. This is my current prediction for what is going to happen. Again, not my prediction for conference championship games. You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find those out. But as of right now, when I sit here standing talking to you, this was in my video earlier today. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you go check it out. Again, it includes not just this bracket right here of playoff teams, but it also includes every other New Year's Six bowl game and what I think is going to play out, kind of looking at that. So, yeah. Just looking at this right here, this is the top 4 as of right now. And this is your playoff field as it currently stands. But we still got one more week of games. So, Nate, what can happen if we see, well, maybe some teams in the top 4 lose? Well, first off, I think it's pretty clear, cut, and dry on some of the teams that are going to be in, right? For starters, I think Georgia and Michigan are playoff locks. I don't think, with the way college football has worked out this year, no matter what happens here this next coming week, whether or not Georgia is able to beat LSU and whether or not Michigan is able to beat Purdue, I do believe firmly, and playoff predictors will show this, pretty much every model predicts this, that Georgia and Michigan are locks for the college football playoff. I think that is fairly set in stone and looking ready to go, win or lose this coming Saturday. The case for TCU is interesting, though, because in my opinion, I said this in my video earlier, I've been saying it for the past couple of weeks, but as of right now, I think TCU is a lock in the college football playoff. However, in order to solidify their spot, you probably got to win the Big 12 championship, my apologies, just in case some things happen, right? Again, I'll talk about it later, but what if TCU were to lose to Kansas State this weekend by 30 or 20 or 17 or something like that, and they get blown out, and you're sitting with a 1-loss Ohio State that the committee has viewed very highly all season long? That could be an interesting topic. We'll talk about that a little bit later. TCU, in my opinion, is a lock. I don't see them going anywhere. But again, that's just me personally. That's my opinion. My opinion does not matter in terms of what the playoff committee thinks. It's a question of whether or not they think TCU is a better team than Ohio State. So I think, again, in my opinion, they're a lock, but you got to win the Big 12 championship just in case. USC, pretty simple here. If you win the Pac-12 title game on Friday, you are in. If you lose, you likely go home. And that is said and done, right? That is the story with USC this year. And then the one team sitting outside the top 4 that I do believe has a shot are the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they're going to need some help. Alabama, I don't see getting into the college football playoff. It was the matter of who was going to be number 5 on Tuesday, and that team was going to get into the college football playoff if there were some chaos to happen. Ohio State was that team that was sitting at 5. That's what I had thought the committee was going to do. That's exactly what the committee did. Ohio State's going to need some help, though, to get into the college football playoff. So let's go ahead and dive into some scenarios now as we start off with scenario number 1, right? Really, really easy scenario to picture here. It's just all the favorites win. What I mean by that is all the teams in the top 4 win, meaning Georgia goes ahead and beats LSU. Michigan beats Purdue. TCU beats Kansas State, and USC beats Utah. If that happens, guys, this is the easiest scenario in the world to predict. Ohio State would be knocked out, and there would be your top 4. Georgia would claim that number 1 spot, while Michigan gets the slot number 2, TCU at number 3, and USC would slot in there at number 4. So the bracket that I showed you earlier in this video would hold true if all of the teams in the top 4 were to go ahead and win this upcoming weekend. However, as we know, that's not all that college football is, right? There are upsets, there are losses, there are teams that lose that, okay, you know what, maybe you shouldn't have lost that game. It was an upset, right? Chaos can still happen even though it's championship week, and we've seen conference championship mayhem unfold before. So diving into some more scenarios now. Scenario number 2, and I think this is the second easiest and maybe second most likely scenario, but USC were to lose, right? What happens if USC were to lose? Well, again, as a reminder, it would look like this, right? Georgia would beat LSU, Michigan would beat Purdue, TCU would beat Kansas State, and Utah were to beat USC on Friday. If that happens, Buckeye fans everywhere, I think, will be able to rejoice, as Georgia will get the number 1 spot, Michigan will get number 2, TCU will get number 3, and the Ohio State Buckeyes sneak their way still into the college football playoff at number 4, and they would take the spot of USC. Something that has always been said, at least I say it all the time, it's hard enough to beat a really good team once. Utah beat USC earlier this year. It's really freaking hard to beat a team twice, and that's what Utah is going to look to be able to do. However, Utah was able to do it last year, right? They beat Oregon in the regular season, faced them again in the conference championship, and were able to beat Oregon again. Could we see Utah happen with the same thing this year, right? That is what this scenario plays out, and that would be your playoff field all the way down below. Again, Georgia would be 1, Michigan would be 2, TCU 3, and Ohio State sneaks back into the playoff at 4. However, that may not be the only time that Ohio State can sneak back in to the playoff, because what were to happen if just TCU were to lose, right? What happens if the Horned Frogs, the comeback kids all year, just can't put it together in the Big 12 championship game and they lose to Kansas State? So this is how the rest of the conference championship games would play out. Of course, Georgia beats LSU, Michigan beats Purdue. Kansas State pulls off the win and wins the Big 12 over TCU. And then USC still beats Utah. Well, I think the top 2, again, fairly easy. Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2. USC's at 4 right now, and with TCU's loss, I think USC would slide up to number 3. For that number 4 spot, though, I think this is going to be the most interesting scenario to see what the college football playoff committee does, right? Obviously, if Georgia wins, Michigan wins, USC wins, they're in, no questions asked. Georgia, Michigan are probably in, no questions asked, regardless. But if TCU were to be the only team that were to go down and to lose this upcoming weekend, you got a debate on your hands. And I'm going to sit here and talk about this one for a little bit, because the playoff committee would have to decide, who do we think is better? A one-loss Ohio State team that has wins over Notre Dame, a solid enough Wisconsin and Iowa squads. You went on the road and beat Penn State. You went on the road, beat a pretty solid Maryland team, but lost your last game of the season to the Michigan Wolverines, right? Well, or would it be a TCU team that went undefeated in the regular season, beat the likes of Texas, Baylor, Kansas, Oklahoma, some pretty solid teams hovering around the middle lines of the Big 12, also able to beat Kansas State, but just couldn't beat Kansas State a second time with Adrian Martinez not playing in that game. And again, Adrian Martinez's status for the Big 12 championship likely up in the air. Ohio State has been winning every single game by double digits, except, of course, the game they lost against Michigan. TCU has had to come back. They had to come back against Oklahoma State. They were in a close battle with Texas. In a way, had to come back and beat Kansas. You had to come back, and at a miracle last-second field goal, you beat Baylor. TCU have been the comeback kids, right? And I also think it would depend on how TCU is able to get past Kansas State. If TCU beats Kansas State by 30, or my apologies, if TCU were to lose to Kansas State by 30, Ohio State may very well end up getting that nod. But if Kansas State pulls off a close last-second win, kind of like we saw in the Big 12 championship game last year where Baylor made that stop on Oklahoma State at the goal line, TCU could end up stealing that spot. Me personally, again, you guys know my stance. I think TCU is a playoff lock. I think they should be in the college football playoff. But many may view Ohio State as the better team, as the not necessarily the better team per se, but the more equipped team to go win a national championship. And they obviously have a bigger brand to their name, which shouldn't really matter. But hey, come to reality, it can have an effect here and there. I think this is the most interesting scenario to play out. 1 through 3 is easy here, but the debate for number 4 is surely to be epic. Horned Frog fans will either feel that they got left out once again, being booted aside for the Ohio State Buckeyes to make way, or TCU fans everywhere will rejoice and keep that spot in the college football playoff. All right, moving on now to scenario number 4, and this is where we see this is where we see multiple teams go down. What if if TCU and USC were to both lose this upcoming weekend? So again, how would that look? You have Georgia beating LSU, Michigan beating Purdue, obviously. All right, Kansas State goes and beats TCU, Utah goes and beats USC. Obviously, Georgia would be 1, Michigan would be 2. That would be set in stone and done. Georgia would end up getting the Peach Bowl. Michigan would end up getting the Fiesta Bowl. And in my opinion, with USC's loss there to Utah, they are out. So in this scenario, TCU losing may not be all that detrimental for Horned Frog fans, as I definitely think they do stay in the college football playoff. Now, if there is any scenario where Alabama can start to rear its head around that playoff corner, it very well may end up being this scenario right here, where, of course, Ohio State would leap in because USC had lost. And then TCU losing as well may leave the playoff committee taking a closer look at Alabama. Again, I don't think so. I don't think Bama's getting anywhere near the college football playoff. So I think if this scenario were to happen, again, it is just that debate, right? How did TCU lose, and who does the committee think is better? It'll either set up a rematch with Ohio State, Michigan in a playoff semifinal, which, as a college football fan, I mean, look, that would be something to watch. We're talking about the biggest Michigan and Ohio State game in history. In the 100-plus years that game has been played, that would be the biggest game. Or if the committee decides that TCU, no, we're still going to go with TCU as the better team to end up getting that 3 seed, then it would just be a scenario played out if just USC were to lose. So this scenario can get pretty interesting, but again, it's coming back to that Ohio State and TCU debate that the committee may very well end up having, no matter what, that the committee will very well end up having if TCU were to end up dropping that game in the Big 12 championship to Kansas State. No matter what happens, no matter if USC were to win or if USC were to lose, or even if Georgia and Michigan were to lose, I think it all comes down to that Ohio State and TCU debate if TCU were to drop that Big 12 championship game. However, if USC loses and TCU were to drop that game, I don't think it's a big deal for the Horned Frogs, as I still believe they would get a playoff spot. It, again, just comes back to that conversation of who do you think is better. Now, that's all for the realistic scenarios. And I'm going to talk more about what would happen, say, if, these certain scenarios happen here, right? Let's go to scenario number 5, which I have just dubbed chaos, because in this scenario, all of the favorites lose. I'm talking LSU beats Georgia, Purdue beats Michigan, Kansas State beats TCU, and Utah beats USC. I honestly believe how this would shake out. I think it's going to look a lot like the previous scenario that we just looked at if USC and TCU were to both lose. I don't think that the committee would jump Ohio State all the way up to number 1. Yeah, they didn't lose the past week, but they couldn't have lost. They didn't play a game. So I don't believe that the playoff committee would be rocketing Ohio State all the way up to number 1 if this chaos scenario were to happen. Again, I'm not going to spend time on this because I just don't see this happening at all. But college football's done crazier things before. So if Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and USC were all to lose, I kind of feel like it's still kind of the same thing. But again, this is another scenario where you could see Alabama sneaking their way into the college football playoff, maybe dropping out a TCU. Because there's no way that there's no way that Bama is going to jump over Ohio State. The committee put Ohio State above Alabama for a reason. It's that if any sort of chaos or anything were to happen, Ohio State would be that team to go into the college football playoff instead of the 2-loss Alabama. But if this scenario were to play out, maybe Alabama throws themselves back into the mix. And again, if this scenario were to happen, look at what it comes back to, the Ohio State versus TCU debate, right? Who gets in, who gets the higher seed? I do believe this is how it would play out if this would. But again, anyone that tells you, I'm not sitting here and telling you guys, I know for a fact that this is going to happen, right? If this scenario were to play out, that I know for a fact that that would be the order of the top 4 right there. Again, there's not saying that the committee says, well, shoot, guys, they all just lost. Well, let's put Ohio State, rocket them at number 1. Who knows what happens with that scenario, right? Again, that's just the way I am projecting things down there. If this scenario were to play out, who knows what the top 4 is going to look like the very next day. But that's kind of all I got as far as scenarios. When you get into things talking about, okay, what if Georgia and Michigan were to lose and TCU and USC were to win? Obviously, if that happens, seeding just changes, right? There's no way Georgia and Michigan drop out, so the seeding would just kind of be flipped. TCU would be number 1 as the only undefeated conference champion. USC would be in at number 2, with Georgia and Michigan falling forward at 3 and 4. Ohio State would be left out. The only way that Ohio State can get into the playoff is if I think Ohio State locks themselves down a playoff spot if USC loses. That's the only way that Ohio State is securely safe in the college football playoff, in my opinion, is if USC goes down tomorrow on Friday. However, if USC were to win, Ohio State fans are probably going to be rooting for TCU to drop that game and probably drop the game by a wide margin. Because again, who's to say that TCU, or that the committee is looking at those two teams and saying that Ohio State is unequivocally better than TCU? Well, TCU made the conference championship game. Ohio State didn't. That has mattered in years past. That's a lie. Sometimes it hasn't mattered in years past because Alabama has gotten in before when they did not go play for a conference championship. So, again, Georgia, Michigan, playoff locks. They are in. They are safe. No matter what, shut the case. That's done. The only way Ohio State is a lock in the playoff is if USC were to lose. But if USC were to win and then TCU were to lose, that conversation becomes a much more interesting debate. And then, again, seeding would just change if you have some combinations of teams win and lose and whatnot, right? Like if Georgia were the only one to lose, would they slip to 3 or 4? Well, obviously, Michigan, TCU, USC would all be conference champions. Georgia might very well end up being 4. Again, it's all just if you have certain combinations of things that push Ohio State out of the picture, meaning one of USC or TCU win, right? You push them out of the picture, which actually pretty much means USC would win. Just seeding would change if there was some other chaos to unfold. That's why I didn't dive into any of those there. But please let me know what you guys think about playoff scenarios down in the comment section below. I think it's a really fascinating topic. I think it's a really fascinating discussion to have. It's pretty simple this year, right? Again, Georgia, Michigan locks. TCU most likely in, but probably have to win anyway. USC, you win and you're in. And Ohio State needs a little bit of help, right? I think these are the 5 teams that you'll see some combination of filling out that bracket on Sunday. And we'll see how everything plays out. Predictions coming out tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, anything like that to help support the channel. And hey, remember to play hard but tailgate harder. Let me know playoff scenarios in the comment section below. See all you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.